Alright everyone, so the best flashback in One Piece history continues. My personal favorite part of this chapter was seeing the Rocks crew dynamics. I love the feel of getting to see all of these legends together before they are legends. Like before they have all of these high status positions like Whitebeard, Emperor, Kaido Emperor, Big Mom Emperor, Shiki, leader of the biggest fleet on the seas. Before all of that, they're just this ragtag group of pirates. An incredibly powerful ragtag group of pirates, but a ragtag group of pirates, ruffians, thieves nonetheless. They bicker, they fight, they squabble, they butt heads internally in so many silly ways, like Rocks throwing that Looney Tunes-esque bomb down at Whitebeard and Kaido, which of course doesn't affect them at all, but then affects Silver Axe, which then reignites his rivalry with Shiki, and it doesn't help that in the meantime, Whitebeard's got his own back kind of by flipping the whole island on its head with the Guragur no Mi, which has sent everybody else tumbling, except for ironically Shiki, which just pisses Silver Axe off even more to see Shiki unscathed out of all of this, and then that just has them going at it. And in the meantime, Rocks is just ignoring the whole scene and surveying the landscape and the Marines approaching and everything like that, like the silly antics of his random ass crew that he's assembled is somehow beneath him. I just loved seeing all of them interact, and it sort of humanizes a lot of these characters as well. Like I have a new view of Big Mom in a way. It's not like we've seen a ton of her, but just seeing her in this context, it makes her feel like a more down-to-earth character, because the Big Mom that we see today is just this absolutely evil, twisted monster, and then the Big Mom that we got in her child backstory was also just this absolutely evil, twisted, delusional monster. But the Big Mom that we see during the Rocks Pirates flashback is just like a normal person, running around with her gang of friends slash rivals, getting up to no good. She doesn't even seem like that bad of a person. Same with Kaido. This isn't the Kaido that we know in the future, who's this tyrannical warlord who turns the entire nation of Wano into his personal slave labor force. This whole period of time with the Rocks Pirates, we know that a lot of them are bad characters or turn into extremely bad characters, but at the same time, what we've seen of their activities as a group as a whole paints them as a bit more morally gray, because they're stealing here, but Oda basically implies that they're stealing from a fake charity organization, and therefore it's somewhat deserved, so they're not actually robbing innocents of their belongings. That makes sense because characters like Whitebeard just wouldn't go along with this sort of behavior if they're actually hurting innocent citizens, but it is just interesting that with this group of Rocks Pirates that has so many, bad apples, I guess that's an understatement, among them, at the end of the day, they're not like this truly deeply evil organization. They are the perfect morally gray mix of characters that do morally gray actions, which indicates that the route that Oda is going with Rocks as a captain is perhaps not as evil as what we've seen with Blackbeard. And Rocks' genuine friendship with Harold also seems to suggest that Rocks may not be that bad of a guy at his core, although we still need to see more of Rocks' grand plan and his true motivations and everything like that before we can really draw strong conclusions on his character. Now, in that vein, Harold is really growing on me as a character. His initial, introduction where it's like, okay, he was a bad giant who was very strong and abused his strength, but then he learned not to abuse his strength, and then he became a good guy and became peaceful and everything. It was pretty straightforward, but then the more you see of this character, and then the more you see of, his stresses and his woes and the things that he's trying to balance, you can't help but feel for him over time. I feel like Harold is one of the most genuinely good characters, being maybe not the best dad, that notwithstanding. Overall, his heart is definitely in the right place, and I do feel like if we look at things in totality, he may actually genuinely be one of the best kings in One Piece, right up there with King Cobra and King Riku. Just the fact that Harold was essentially at one point the strongest character in the world, barring, I suppose, Imu, and then chose to completely set that aside and leave it behind to focus almost entirely on peace and diplomacy, that does make him a fairly unique character in One Piece. We've never seen a character quite like that before. Obviously, Harold basically broke his rules and went back to fighting in this chapter, but for good reason. And that's the other part that I really, really like about Harold's story, is that now he is being faced with a very, very interesting moral dilemma. I really want to see how Harold responds to this, because from what we're getting of Harold so far is that he's a very honorable, morals, values-based character, or at least he developed into that. But then how is he going to reconcile betraying his friend for the sake of his nation? I think that is genuinely going to be a very, very difficult choice for him, and I'm very curious about where this leads to, because Imu talks about Harold's mistake on a certain day, so I have a feeling that Harold found a way to get around this, and maybe play both sides. But at the same time, we know that Harold didn't kill Rocks in the end, and we also know that Harold didn't successfully make Elbaf a member nation under the world government. So I'm very, very interested to see what choice Harold ultimately makes, because at the end of the day, neither of those things happen, but we know that Harold's own story ends in tragedy. And we also know that ultimately this is Loki's backstory, so even though we're focusing so much on rocks, ultimately everything is going to come full circle to what happened with Harold in the throne room and what Loki saw. So just the way that Oda's weaving together the events of this backstory is so impressive, because you really cannot predict what direction this backstory is going to go, and Oda's really taking his time. That's what I really enjoy and appreciate about it. It doesn't feel like every single chapter Oda's trying to get to the next major event, or that we're racing towards God Valley or anything like that. It really feels like we're getting the time to really sink into what is going on in this era, what are the various dynamics between pirates, intra-crew dynamics, geopolitical dynamics, everything that's going on at this point in time. So love the pacing of this backstory so far. For instance, this chapter we also got to see a young Garp, Sengoku, and Suru, and in that group, it does feel like Sengoku maybe lost the most aura, as people say, from this showing, because while Sengoku, as we know him later on in the story, he is this very commanding, put-together fleet admiral, looking at the dynamics back then, it really feels like, you know, with Garp, we know that he was refusing promotion for a long time, and Garp was the first pirate that they sent in to go resolve the God Valley incident, and just the way that Garp speaks, it feels like he's almost above even the Admiral Kong that he's speaking to in terms of like who really holds the respect there. So with Garp at this point in time, he probably is at least Admiral level himself, if not higher. He just refuses promotion as far as we know. But with Sengoku, the fact that Sengoku is a Vice Admiral at this point in time, well, that basically just means that Sengoku legitimately was just Vice Admiral level. And he looks and seems like that as well, which means that Sengoku was basically really far behind Garp actually for a long period of time. Sengoku must have caught up way later. I feel like we've always gotten this image of like Garp and Sengoku as this dynamic duo, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sengoku was more like the Helmeppo to Garp's Kobe for a long period of time, like really lagging far behind and then maybe eventually way later catching up to some degree. But first, we're doing a huge summer sale where you can buy 2 island posters and get 3 free. That's right, for this month only, you can get 5 island posters for the price of 2, and you even get free shipping on our brand new site, OneDreamStudio.com. And now when you put any 5 island posters you like into the cart, 3 of them will automatically be free. And in case you missed it, we have new versions of all the most popular islands, all vividly reimagined, and this month we're even adding in a brand new version of Elbaf. So if you've been holding off on getting your island posters, this summer sale is your chance to get them at a major discount. And if you've been waiting to complete your full collection, then now's your chance to get the last few islands that you're missing. Because if you get all the islands, you also get the final exclusive unlockable island, the Moon, sent to you for free. On top of this, all new island poster versions are going out of production after this summer sale. So get your posters while this summer sale lasts by hitting the link in the description below. And then of course we had the big reveal of this chapter, the kind of crazy twist at the end, which was Shaki opening up her first bar here at Hachinosu for some reason. And this sets up a very surprising turn of events, because in chapter 1096, Garp talks about how the world government stole the quote-unquote crown jewel from Hachinosu, so of course the Rocks pirates would come to get it back. And in this chapter, it's basically framed as though Shaki was the crown jewel of Hachinosu. So that would basically mean that, from what it sounds like, the God Valley battle, the biggest battle in the entire modern era of One Piece, a battle that absolutely dwarfs Marineford in terms of scale and significance, that entire battle was basically started because the Rocks pirates just thought Shaki was really hot. You know, this wasn't exactly a Marineford situation where Whitebeard came after his adopted son and all of the Whitebeard pirates banded together and called all their friends together because they were going after their brother in arms who they loved like family. This was more so like the Rocks pirates just really thought that Shaki was hot. And they got really upset that the world government stole their local baddie. For some reason, God Valley actually being just one big extended Sanji gag sequence makes it feel like it loses just the tiniest bit of weight. I've seen some people argue that, well, no, this happens in mythology all the time, like the Trojan War was this grand war that happened over a woman's beauty. But no, that's not what happened in the Trojan War. Everyone didn't go to war because Helen was so hot. Helen of Troy was beautiful, but what happened was that she left her husband, a king, for another king, Paris, and then naturally King A was pissed at that, and so he led his kingdom to war. The Trojan War was a king declaring war because his wife, left him for another king. And then naturally both kingdoms called upon other allies to help them now that a war had broken out. It's not like everyone in all these nations of the world were going to war because they all wanted to Helen. The Epic of Troy is not even remotely close to Oda just having all of the Rocks pirates getting crazy gag heart eyes over the exact same generic One Piece female design number 88, and then all of them being so down bad that they launched the greatest world war in modern One Piece history because this hot girl in a bar that they barely know who doesn't even like them got kidnapped. I'll just say this doesn't exactly feel like it has quite the same dramatic weight as, say, Ace at Marineford or Robin at Enies Lobby. But you know, it's One Piece. Sometimes Oda just wants to make things a bit sillier. I will say that based on the Rocks Pirates dialogue in chapter 1096, it does sound like their assault on God Valley may not have been just over Shaki. It sounds like some other things may have been stolen as well, particularly devil fruits, which also tracks since we know that right now one of Rocks' main goals is getting the 2 devil fruits, which he intends to use to overthrow Imu. So the God Valley conflict is coming together, but I don't think we have quite all the pieces yet. And finally, we have a great question from the Voice of the People, my top tier of patrons. So Jay asked, why didn't Harold exert peace through strength? Is he stupid? We know the world government doesn't mess with the Yonko territories. Whitebeard protected Fishman Island with 2 sentences and a flag. I agree with Rocks when he says, I can't stand seeing you grovel to the world government anymore. So there's a difference between what Harold is trying to do versus what the Yonko try to do. The Yonko establish peace within a certain territory, right? So for example, the areas that Whitebeard places under his flag are safe. The area that Shanks places under his flag are safe. But Harold doesn't want to just create a bubble. He's trying to do the opposite. He's trying to build connections. He doesn't want to just create a little bubble of peace. He genuinely wants to build connections between nations of all races and places. He wants to foster, ideally it seems like, global peace to some degree, wide-sweeping diplomacy, wide-sweeping connections. He doesn't see why the world has to be the way that it is. So in a sense, Harold wants to pave the path for a better world for all, but he doesn't want to do so through violence and revolution like Dragon. So Harold is basically dealing with the hardest path, because the world government is naturally going to get in the way of that sort of thing, especially when they're not accepting Elbaf as a member nation of the world government. But Harold doesn't want to use violence to try and fight back against the world government and shrug their rules like that, until of course this chapter where he's sort of forced to show his hand. So that's a big part of why I like Harold a lot. His goals and his stances are very unique. He's not like the Yonko, he's not like revolutionaries, he's not like Rocks, he's really his own thing, like a king with really, really great strength that just wants to build a better world through peace, diplomacy, trade, connections, and things like that. But the problem is that there's a much bigger entity in charge of everything that doesn't want that stuff to work out that neatly. And Harold wants to work around that system without actually actively fighting against it, not because he can't, because he's very much capable of doing so, but because he feels that that is wrong. So Harold really has slowly turned into one of my favorite characters just because of how unique he is in One Piece. We've never really had a character like him. So again, very much looking forward to the decision that Harold makes with the choice that the world government has given him. I'm going to give this chapter a solid 8 out of 10. I'm really looking forward to chapter 1158, and with that, I will talk to you all later.